Okay, okay. Super excited. I think we have nearly 100 people in here. Amazing. Thank you guys all for coming. I can't believe the turnout considering we literally did an in-person session last week. So thank you for everyone who's coming. Hope we can teach you a lot today. I'm going to just come out and say it right off the bat. We have never done a YouTube Live before. We are not experts in technology. We're experts in real estate. So if this whole thing blows up in our faces, we apologize in advance, but we're going to do our absolute best. One thing we really wanted to focus on here is having a really solid Q&A session, allowing people to ask the questions, no matter how strange, no silly, whatever that they want to ask. Because whenever we do these things in person at the office, we do them right here. Some of you have probably been here before. It gets a little hectic when 200-300 people are in the room and it's just total chaos. So this is a little more intimate, 70-80 people on YouTube, and a nice chat where people can ask whatever they want without fear, without everyone stepping on top of each other. So we'll go through the presentation and then we'll ask the questions at the end. Let's hope this thing works, guys. So we are here to talk about CMHC MLI Select in Alberta, which is, in my opinion, the best place to invest in 2025. Not just in Canada, but probably in the world. And I love to start this off by saying one thing. Friss oder stirb. And some of you are probably saying, what in the hell is that? But I'll tell you exactly what it is. It is a German phrase that many of you probably know. Sink or swim. Or other interpretations could be adapt or die. You know, change how you're acting or turn into dust. The fact of the matter is that the way we've been looking at real estate investing for the last decade, especially in Ontario, is no longer a viable method of making money for the investors or the agents alike. So you either can adapt or you can die. You can innovate or you can fade into nothing and become irrelevant in the world of real estate. And with the CMHC MLI Select Program and with Alberta, we are here to show you how you can make that adaptation. And we certainly have when we started selling this product around 1 year ago. Some of you have been in my seminars before and you've seen this quote. I'll abridge it for you. 90% of all millionaires became so through owning real estate. More money has been made in real estate than in all other industrial investments combined. The wise young man of wage earner of today invests his money in real estate. And we all know who said that. It's written on the bottom of the screen. It was Andrew Carnegie. He's a billionaire. He owned Carnegie Steel. If you've ever been in New York, he owns half of downtown New York. His name is on everything. Carnegie Hall, anyone. So the question I always ask, and unfortunately with a webinar, I can't really do it, but maybe with Agnes here beside me looking at the chat, put up your hand in the chat if you have ever invested in real estate. Whether you made money, lost money, if you've ever invested in real estate, put up your hand or say yes or whatever in the chat. We'll see if this works. If it doesn't work, then...
yeah, heart, emoji.
We got one.
Something. We got a thumbs up.
They can hear me, right? So the question becomes, if you've invested in real estate and you're not a millionaire, you haven't made millions of dollars doing it, why is that? Right? Because whenever I ask this question normally, and it works a little better in person, and we get put up, you know, in a room of 200 people where we are right now, 180 of them put up their hand. And then when I say, how many of you become millionaires? 20 of them put up their hands.
Oh, we're getting yes.
Right? So the question is, if you haven't become wealthy, if you haven't built true wealth in real estate, why is that? And my thesis is because society, whether intentionally or unintentionally, has lied to you and has taught you the wrong investment strategy, the wrong way to use financing to your advantage. Most people growing up, they talked about what they want to do on the weekend. They talked with their family about their feelings, and they talked about one day paying down their house and things like that. They were not taught how to leverage a proper capital stack to actually make money. And they were not taught that buying multifamily, multiplex is actually easier than buying individual units for investment purposes. So that's what we're going to talk to you guys about now. And in case, you know, you're not sure if I know what I'm talking about, in the last quarter of 2024, we sold over $200 million of CMHC MLI Select product. That generated over $1.9 million in commissions for our agents, and it also generated over $2 million of cash flow for our investors. Nearly 500 homes, of which 70 of those are affordable homes. So not only are we making everyone money, the agents are making money, the investors are making money, even the builders are making money, but we're also supplying needed housing at affordable rents to people in this country. And the crazy thing is this stat's out of date. It's just we've been so busy planning for our gala this weekend, I haven't had a chance to get the marketing people to update it. But if you track us in our groups or you're talking to any of our agents about purchasing one, you'll know that we're selling nearly $20 million of CMHC MLI product per week since January 1st. It's actually selling at such a rapid pace that it almost scares me because it's crazy. But I know that every single project we're selling, every single offering we're giving to buyers will end up cash flow positive, making them money, and giving them opportunities to potentially take out equity and build real wealth. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So what is CMHC? Obviously, most of you guys probably know it's the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. But what is their real purpose, right? I mean, if you really distill it down, at the end of the day, they're a federal program to encourage housing. It's as simple as that. And how do they do it? They provide financing solutions, including mortgage insurance, to buyers. That's about all you really need to understand about why CMHC exists. I mean, they've been around a very long time. They've been in the news quite a bit in Q4. Most people probably saw this article on September 16th when they announced that they were doing the biggest revamp of their program basically in decades, right? I mean, it's written right there. It says boldest reform in decades, where they expanded the mortgage insurance cap from $1 million to $1.5 million, and they expanded out to 30-year AMs. The goal of which was, to make housing more affordable, put more housing in the hands of Canadians by making it easier to buy a home that you may not have the deposit for, or you may not have the ability to make the payments on. Also in the news, Daniel Folk, good friend of mine, talk to him nearly every day. He's trying to convince me to start selling stuff in Newfoundland, but he's very, very active on what's going on in the financing world. Also in the news, and this literally started last week, that for 4-unit projects, CMHC will now do up to $2 million financing and 90% loan to value with 30-year amortizations, meaning, lots of people in Toronto that want to add a garden suite or maybe redevelop their home, adding in a basement unit. CMHC will now help and give really attractive financing on those programs to help you build much needed sort of missing middle housing in like areas like Toronto and etc. But that's actually not what we're talking about today, because what most people don't realize is that CMHC kind of has two arms or two divisions, if you want to call it that, right? They have the residential sort of personal lending and the stuff we just showed you, the expanded mortgage program for houses and the expanded and the new mortgage program for 4-unit projects falls under that personal residential lending. What most people are not aware of is CMHC's extensive commercial lending insurance program. And when I say it's extensive, I mean they have so many different acronyms and programs that even I don't know all of them. But what it means is that, on that commercial side, CMHC is federally mandated to help build and buy apartment buildings in Canada with the goal of providing housing stock. At the end of the day, if we go back a few slides, it's all about getting more housing in the hands of Canadians. So what is the program we're talking about? It's the MLI Select. That's the, the Wagyu steak. It's the best one that we can kind of look at. As I said, there's several other lending insurance programs they offer, but we like the best, right? Like, why go halfway? So what it is they provide mortgage loan insurance for multi-unit developments, and they call a multi-unit development, multiplex, multifamily, any project that is over 5 units to allow favorable financing conditions. And there are tiered incentives with that program based on affordability, accessibility, and energy efficiency. Just like any government program, they'll give you some good stuff, but they also want you to give something back, right? There's always a pound of flesh involved in that deal. So how do you qualify a project for CMHC MLI Select? And I say this in a way that, I kind of joke about it, is that I'm going to teach you all about how you qualify. But as we go further into this webinar, you're going to realize that you don't really need to know any of this stuff, because what we do is we take away all the headaches for you. We make this easy, right? But we still want you to understand what it is that you're looking at, what it is that you're potentially buying or helping your clients buy. Here's a real big, scary chart. And, every time I do this presentation in person, people start taking screenshots of it or camera things. And I say, whoa, don't take your time. It's not necessary. This is literally just copy and pasted off of the CMHC website. If you go to Google right now and you type in CMHC MLI Select, the very first page that will come up on Google is their page, which explains all this stuff. And this chart is right there. The only thing I would recommend, make sure you're looking at the new construction version, okay? Because there's new construction and there's resale. We focus primarily on new construction, and that is the chart that I'm showing you. If you look at the resale chart, it will look very, very different. You'll notice here, this chart might be a little bit confusing, but you have three sort of main categories as we discussed: the affordability, energy efficiency, and the accessibility. And more importantly, you will see that there's different points which you get for hitting certain targets, right? If you hit 10% affordable, you get 50 points. If you hit 40% above code for energy efficiency, you get 50 points. If you make 15% of the units, whatever the heck B651-18 is, you get 20 points. So question is, what are points and why do I need them, right? And that's why I say you don't really need to sit here and try to perform calculus on this chart. All you need to understand is this chart. The more points you get, the more good stuff you get. And when we work on any project, we only care about 100 points because realistically, the 50 and 70 points are not that juicy, you might want to say. And it's not that expensive in terms of either giving back on affordability or upgrading your building to go for the 100 points, which gives you essentially the best terms, right? So the most important thing, and the thing that I think has caused us to be able to sell so much of this product, is this column right here, the loan to cost. CMHC, when you have 100 points, will happily give you up to 95% loan to cost financing. And I just want to be very clear about the language there. There's a few things that people need to understand. Number one, I said up to. I did not say always. So there's a lot of terms and conditions which could impact your final ratios. And those are things that we'll discuss a little further on. But just know that if you hit all the right metrics, you can get up to 95% financing where you only need 5% down. The second piece is that I said cost, not value. When you get a regular mortgage for your house, if you pay $1 million, that's what the bank calls the value. And if you get 75% loan to value, then you have to put $250,000 down on the value. The cost of construction is not necessarily the value of the product, right? And this will come into play later because it might only cost you $1 million to build something. The value might be 1.5. And that provides us really cool levers that we'll discuss later that can really take this program to the next level. The DCR we'll discuss in a moment. And then the other very important thing here is this 50-year amortization. Because if you're going to be taking a 95% loan, you want this thing to cash flow, you better have a pretty long payment plan to make it happen, right? And so that's what CMHC makes possible. And people think when they've never heard of this program before, they go 50-year loans. Like, that's not even a thing. I've never heard of that. But yes, with CMHC mortgage insurance on CMHC MLI Select, you can get 95% financing and you can get 50-year amortizations. Some of the other elements in this chart we'll discuss a little further on, but these are the really important things that we need to know and understand. So what are those requirements and how do we get them, right? And the most important one to understand is the affordability. So no matter where you take your points from, you have to have a minimum of some of them coming from affordability, which means whichever province you're in, whichever municipality you're in, at least you're going for 10% affordable in your building. But what I want to explain is this is not the dirty word you're thinking of. This is not low-income housing where the government is picking a tenant for you, someone that might be a problem, someone that might be trouble. This is not a tenant that's being selected by the government. It is not a tenant that is being paid for by the government. All that affordability means, sorry, we have some people showing up at the office. Hello, hello, hello. All that affordability means is that a certain number of your units need to be rented below a certain rate. They're still market units. You're still going up to the market and you're still picking those tenants. But CMHC sets a benchmark for every major municipality in the country, and they ask that that percentage of your units, if we go up that chart, right, if we go back to here, 10%, 15%, or 25% are rented at or below that rent. So it's very important to understand that we're not building slums here. This is not Toronto community housing. This is not Regent Park before it was redeveloped. In fact, most of the time, we don't even lose anything by having these affordable units because we can get creative with the design of the building, meaning smaller units and higher auxiliary fees. What do I mean by that? I mean, nowhere in CMHC does it says you need to make a 3,000 square foot one bedroom with gold toilets and marble floors affordable. So we can make smaller units. We can restrict the square footage. We can have more basic finishes in those units if we need. What do I mean by higher auxiliary fees? CMHC affordability only speaks to the dwelling itself, the warm, closed-in place that the person lives. If parking Is it a rental option in your building? They do not say it has to be affordable. If pet services, allowing pets in Alberta, for example, is an option in your building, they do not say it have to be affordable. Same thing for storage locker, access to the amenities, anything else, if you understand where I'm going with this. So what it usually means is at the end of the day, the affordable doesn't actually cost us anything. We can engineer around it. And I spend a little bit of extra time here because probably the number one question I get from investors is, how long do I have to have this affordable? How much is it going to impact my cash flows? Blah, blah, blah. And they're not really absorbing what I'm saying is that the way we design these buildings, one of the reasons we focus on new construction is because it allows us to design around this to minimize the exposure on cash flows, in most cases having none at all. In terms of energy efficiency, in terms of accessibility, I say you don't really need to know anything about this. And the reason is because it's just building code. It's saying you need to build above the building code, right? So you need minimum energy efficiency requirements. You need minimum accessibility requirements. I am not an engineer. I am not an architect. And frankly, whether you are buying a project from us or another supplier, or you decide you want to become a builder and do it yourself, you don't even need to know this, because all you would be telling your consultant, your architect, your engineer, your code consultant is, we want to hit 20 points on MLI, and they will know exactly what needs to be added to the building to meet those requirements, right? So in the same way, if you're building a building, you don't ask the engineer why they need a steel beam here. You don't ask what I need to put for the accessibility or the energy efficiency. If you need it, you just put it, right? The construction guys know they need to stick it in there, and then boom, you get a letter for MLI that says you're meeting those requirements. So I don't dwell on these a lot because they're quite simple requirements. They get put in the construction, and that's all there is really to it. It's the affordability people need to spend a moment and understand does not impact us. We're not taking low-income tenants. We're not dealing with problem tenants. You're still a market rent building. So especially in Alberta, that is where we focus. And I will explain this a little bit further on, but that's why this entire presentation is focused on Alberta and MLI Select together, because there's just a bit of a crazy twilight zone vortex where the programs just align very well with the current environment in Alberta to allow for very high cash flows and profit margins for investors there. So what are those key benefits again? Let's just review it. Number one, as we said, you can get up to a 50-year amortization. You can get up to 95% loan to cost financing, which means that you can get as low as 5% down. You're getting interest rates below prime, and you can lock in a 10-year term if you choose. So all loans with CMHC MLI Select are fixed term. You can do 5-year or 10-year. Right now, you probably would not do a 5-year because it's extremely hard. The money's not there because they're using it for other programs, but also because if you're building cash flows today, why give yourself stress, right? Why worry about it when you have 10 years of same interest rate, knowing that you're never going to have to wake up one day worrying about how to pay that mortgage? And just to put that in perspective, how long 10 years is. In 2019 and 2020, CMHC MLI Select was papering 10-year deals at 1.9% interest. It's now 2025, the beginning of 2025. All of those people that they papered those deals for are only halfway through their term. Interest rates went up to 7%, 8%, depending on your borrowing strength. Everyone was freaking out. People were selling at losses, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the guys who had locked in 10-year money up until basically the middle of 2022, they were sleeping well at night, and they're still sleeping well until potentially 2032. So if you can get a building that cash flows today, take the 10-year money. Even if you're looking at it going, oh, it's 4% interest, 4.2% interest, you don't know how high interest rates could go in the future. Lock it in and sleep well at night with your investment because you're happy with the cash flows, you're happy with the principal it's paying down at the time. So what does this really in turn come to? It essentially means that when you have a project approved by CMHC, you essentially have guaranteed high returns and positive cash flows. And immediately every time I say the word guaranteed, my hair goes up. I'm sure many people's hair go up because guaranteeing something is a very strong word, right? It's an extremely strong word and it comes with consequences. So how can something be guaranteed if you have an approved MLI Select project? How can that be? And the answer is that essentially MLI Select by nature guarantees positive cash flow because you have a third-party sanity check involved in this deal. CMHC adjudicators conduct their own analysis of the costs, the rents, the construction costs to determine a project's cash flow, right? They'll take what you apply, they'll take your application and they'll say, I'm going to tweak this number, I'm going to adjust that number. and they are only going to approve projects that have a cash flow above 110% of cost, or DSCR. And that is what I was saying before, that DCR. Essentially what that is your net operating income on a building, okay? So you have rent, you minus the expenses, you back out your vacancies, and that is your net operating income. We'll just use very simple numbers. Say you have $200 of rent, $100 of expenses, you have $100 net operating income. Then the maximum mortgage you could support is approximately $90 a month. I know that math is slightly off. Don't kill me in the group. Division is harder than multiplication. But essentially, you need to have 110% operating income of the mortgage payment. We will never sell a project below 115. We will never even look at a project below 115 because we need to have a safety margin. We know that, CMHC adjudication can be a little tricky. We never know exactly what they're going to decide. We use all of their benchmark numbers, real world examples, etc. But by having that safety margin, we ensure our buyers have a lot of extra protection in any deal we submit to them. In fact, most of our deals are closer to 120 or even maybe a little higher. But essentially anything over 115 is safe. Anything high, we really try to get as high as we can for every deal, but we never push it anywhere near the minimums. So you have this third party who has no vested interest in the deal blessing it, right? So how can it really not be cash flow positive when we're using such conservative numbers that CMHC wants to see? And that's the whole point of this program. So what I always tell people is leverage government-backed financing, maximize your investment. Like, why swim upstream? Why would you not work with the government when you can profit from them? And I always like to joke around and say, the government has been screwing me and probably half of Canada for the last 20, 30 years. Healthcare is broken, streets are full of potholes, you can't even get a passport in a reasonable period of time. Just about the only program that they have actually done properly is CMHC MLI Select. So if you've been paying tens and hundreds of thousands of taxes over the last 20 or 30 years, at least get something back for it and use the one program that can actually build you wealth, right? And look at all the people that are making money with government contracts. This is the one program that can make you money, and you're leveraging government-backed financing insurance to make it happen. So the question then naturally becomes, why isn't everybody doing this? If this is such a crazy good deal, it sounds even too good to be true, 95% down, and you get 50-year loans, and you get the cheapest interest rates on the planet, and you can lock in the money for 10 years, and Jake, you say that these are always going to be cash flowing. Like, why isn't everyone doing it? Well, a year ago, I used to say, a couple things, but now it's kind of funny because almost everyone is doing it. As I mentioned, we sold hundreds of millions of dollars of this product, and things are flying literally faster right now than we can find good opportunities. But the short answer to why not everyone does this is because if you make a Venn diagram of people who want to be builders and people who want to be landlords, those don't really overlap. Being a landlord is supposed to be a passive income. Obviously, you still have to do some work, but in general, if you have a well-managed property, all you're doing is meeting your property manager once a month maybe, and meeting your accountant once a year to file taxes. You really shouldn't have to do a lot. Being a builder is complicated. I mean, I've sort of simplified it into 7 points here, from land acquisition through to ongoing property management and all the things in between, but this is not 7 points. This is a full-time job. It's a lot of stress. I know I've built properties and they kept me awake at night and my hair got thinner for sure. Right? I mean, just thinking about buying the right land, you have to deal with the municipality who's probably trying to screw you and not let you build what you want, right? You have to deal with getting approvals with them, hiring the right architects, planners, engineers, designers, stormwater consultants. There's so many consultants, it's absolutely insane, okay? You have to get these things designed in a way that people like. You have to make the product work in a way not just for the municipality, but also for CMHC. Then you have to find someone to build it for you, because I highly doubt anyone in this webinar is going to be out there swinging a hammer. And you have to make sure that the people building it for you aren't screwing you, because they can smell blood in the water. They can smell a guy who doesn't know anything about construction, and they will overcharge you on every aspect of this and bleed you dry. Then you actually have to manage the property. That's kind of the easy part. But again, you want that to be passive, right? So what we have done for Alberta, using our years of experience in both pre-construction and in the multifamily commercial spaces, we kind of had an aha moment about a year ago where we said, why can't we package up apartment buildings or multiplexes or townhome blocks and sell them pre-construction the way we used to sell pre-con, but have them already underwritten by the best underwriters in the business, have them already sort of pre-blessed by the best CMHC brokers in the business, already have the property manager aligned, so that all an investor needs to do is essentially give a deposit, submit with the broker, and then own a beautiful building that's going to be fully turnkey managed for them. And that's what we kind of put together. We eliminated the issue in the Venn diagram of, builders and landlords not overlapping by essentially removing the building component. And I'll tell you right now, absolutely, if you want to go be a builder, you could in theory probably find something a little cheaper than we're delivering it. But we're making it so you don't have to do anything. And not just that, but we're offering it at a fixed price. When you do your own construction, it's usually cost plus, meaning any cost overruns, delays in supplies, missing trades that day, those are eating into your potential equity. Whereas when we offer a project, the price is the price, and none of the other parts of the deal are your concern, right? So I like to equate it to how pre-con used to work, because some people truly need to really kind of get this. Is if you walked into a Tridel sales center, I assume most people on this webinar are in Ontario, everyone kind of knows Tridel, and you want to buy a one-bedroom condo today, and you say it's the most beautiful condo in the world, I love it, $600,000. They give you a contract, you give them a few deposit checks, and then you don't have to do anything, right? For a few years until what they say the delivery date is, and then they call you up and you get your perfect shiny new condo. And if there's any issue with that condo, there's a ding in the wall, the sink is running slow, whatever, they will come and fix it and have a warranty on it for 7 years in Ontario. Whether Tridel made money on that or lost money on that is not your problem. At the end of the day, you paid $600,000, Tridel delivers a condo. Whether Tridel had to take 5 years, 10 years getting approval from the city, who their architect was, the designer was, how much they had to bribe a city councilor to get those extra 5 floors, none of that is your problem, right? And that's exactly how we are offering these opportunities in the CMHC space, is we have already identified sites that work. We've worked with reputable builders and GCs. We've aligned with the broker, the underwriter, and everyone in the chain so that the buyer does not need to really do any work on the deal at all. So what are the requirements to invest in these projects, right? So obviously you need to have the deposit of, depending on the project, typically we are not going to offer anything for sale that would need more than 10% deposit. And we qualify every buyer at 10%. And we tell you, if you get 90-10, be happy. We're always targeting 95-5. And if you get 93-7 or something like that, be very happy. You get 95-5, you better, invite me to your daughter's wedding, essentially, because where else on the planet can you own an entire apartment building with as little as 10% or even 5% down? You need to have 10% liquidity. What is liquidity? Liquidity is cash, gold, stocks, bonds that are not in an RRSP, or lines of credit that you may have access to. Essentially, it's anything you can turn into cash that day, right? Your antique car in your granddad's garage is not a liquid asset. And you have to have a total net worth of about 25% of the project value. Now, the deposit is separate, but the liquidity and net worth are cumulative. So if you need 10% liquidity, then you really only need 15% additional net worth. But we just say you need 25% of the whole project and 10% needs to be liquid. If you have money in RRSPs or RESPs or any other type of registered account, it will be heavily discounted in value. So you better actually have accessible liquidity, lines of credit, cash is king. Those are where you really want to be. Or if you have $1 million in a stock account that you can liquidate today, that's okay. Look at this little button at the bottom here. Personal income is not considered. And this is what I was talking about from the beginning of this call when I said you have been lied to by society. Because most people think I got to start with a townhouse, I got to start with a condo and rent it out. I could never afford 5 units, 10 units, 15 units because I only make $150,000 a year. Once you go over 5 units, in fact, really it's once you go over 4 units, but it's 5 units for CMHC, they are not giving you the loan off of your personal income. They are giving it off of the building's income. That's why the debt service matters. They do not give a shit if you make $1 million or you make $1 or you make $0. They just care that you have the equity requirements. They also care that, you're not like an overall kind of shit show of a person. So they will check your credit, but you don't need perfect credit. You don't need an 850 or 900. Basically anything over a 630 is an automatic yes. If you're below 630, you need to do some explaining, but it could be explained away. It's really case dependent. Generally, what CMHC is looking for is, are you like a responsible adult, right? If they see that you're not paying your bills, that you have judgments, that you have collections, they don't want to lend to you. But the important element is personal income is not considered. And especially for investors, where so many investors are small business owners. And we all know, I'm a small business owner. We all try to minimize our personal income because we're paying 53% income tax. You know, I know lots of small business owners that own $5 million houses but make $40,000 a year on their T4. This is the perfect type of product for you, because buying a traditional investment where you need to get a loan in your own name is very, very challenging in those situations, right? So commercial lending is a whole other ballpark. And that's why I say you've kind of been lied to by society. It's actually easier to buy a fiveplex than it is a single condo. As long as all you need is the cash. You don't need anything else, right? The other nice thing about commercial lending is this will not show up on your personal credit report. So many people, they've bought, maybe there's people in this chat that have bought 4, 5, 6 condos or townhomes or other things before. And now even if they make good money and they go to the bank will not give them another mortgage, because the banks now just simply don't want to give more than 4 or 5 personal loans these days, right? Even if you make like $10 million a year. With commercial lending, it doesn't show up in your credit. The security is against the asset, and you can have a billion of these loans. Like within the reason of any person here that's not literally flying on private jets on a regular basis, you will never run out of access to this type of loan. And even if you get a $10 million CMHC loan today, you can go buy a house tomorrow in your personal name and the bank won't even know you did the $10 million CMHC loan today. So yes, you have been tricked, you have been misled by society on how to actually invest, because it's much easier to buy multiplexes with commercial lending, whether you use CMHC or not. Even if you just want to buy a fiveplex and go to the bank and get a regular loan, it's literally easier than it is to do 1 or 2 units. So again, one last summary, and then we'll jump into the Alberta stuff, which is the really fun stuff. Is they're government-backed loans. Again, my designer forgot the word backed. They are not issued by the government. They're still issued by private lenders, but they are government-backed through insurance, where you can get up to 95% financing, up to 50-year amortizations, up to 10-year terms, below prime rates, third parties giving you a sanity check that this actually works, and the way we deliver it, fixed price construction. So how can you really lose with a program like this, right? Everyone says this is too good to be true. Like, how can you lose? But there's more. There's more. There's one last thing, right? And I love to do this because Steve Jobs is so cool when he does this. It's much more exciting on stage in front of everyone. Oh, the lights went out again. They also offer, I'm sending Agnes to go turn on the lights, because modern building codes, you can't have light switches. You have to use whatever you call it, motion sensors. They have pari passu lending, which is Latin. I don't know, maybe the guys at CMHC wanted to be doctors or something, but essentially pari passu lending means equal footing. Now, where most people may have heard of this is on extremely large loans. You know, let's say Brookfield Place in downtown Toronto was for sale. It's like $2 billion. No single bank is going to take that loan. It's just too big. So 3 or 4 banks might get together, but it's not a first, second, and third loan. They're equal footing loans. Maybe they're each taking 300 million or something like that. But what CMHC allows is they allow equal footing loans when you refinance a property. And what they mean by that is they're essentially giving you a second loan, but it's at the similar interest rates to your first loan. Essentially, whenever you're doing that refi, it's going to be at that same bond rate interest at the time. So what that means is, because you can't break your first loan because you're in a 10-year term, you'd have a huge penalty. But now you've gotten all this extra equity, like we talked about at the beginning. The property's gone up. You want to get some of that juice out, but you don't want to sell it. Well, you can go get a new appraisal, and you can go back to CMHC with a new application. And they'll say, yeah, we think you can pull out 200,000, 300, 400,000 more from this property, and they will give you a second loan, but they treat it with equal footing to allow you to pull out that equity, right? And that can be done essentially at any time. Now, when I say essentially at any time, there's no like prescribed time limit. No one's going to be doing it the day after they buy a property, because that wouldn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you have just gotten a loan that size at the beginning, right? But generally, whenever an appraised value has increased enough that it makes economic sense, because obviously getting new appraisals and going through the application process is not cheap, but if there's enough equity to pull out, it can be worth it. And obviously, you know, you can sit down and you can do some math to determine if it's worth it, and myself or an underwriter can help when that makes sense. But what it really means is that without selling the property, without losing your beautiful 50-year amortization, 95% down first loan, you can get the value out of the property. It means you can get your initial investment out. Or if the property's gone up enough in value, there's no guarantees these things go up, but if it's gone up enough in value, you can even pull out more. I have seen deals where within a very short time frame, people have been able to get 2, maybe even 3 times their investment out of the launch. Now, I want to be very clear because lots of people always want to talk about risks and downsides and other things. None of that is guaranteed. The only way you can do something like this is if the value goes up and the cash flows can support it. There's no automatic, oh, it's going to double in value or anything like that. In fact, that's exactly the kind of misleading stuff I'm trying to avoid, where a lot of people in the Toronto condo market got themselves into trouble over the last 10 years thinking that prices could never do anything but going up. The one thing you have with CMHC lending that is good is your cash flow and you're paying down your mortgage building equity. The ability to pull out additional equity through pari passu lending is the icing on top of the cake. When the conditions are right, interest rates drop, rents go up, values go up, this is how real generational wealth is created, right? And we have to ask ourselves, like, what is the purpose of investing in real estate? If you ask a lot of people who make $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 a year, they go, oh, I'm saving up for retirement. I want to leave something for my kids, a little nest egg, But that's not going to really change your life. Buying 1 or 2 condos, even buying 1 5 or 6plex is not going to change your life. Like, my thing, because I'm an incredibly, weird guy, is like, I say, like, what is going to get you from flying in economy to business class, right? What is going to allow you to go on a vacation anytime you want without worrying about it? Even a 5plex or a 6plex is not going to do that. But using leverage, being able to pull out equity where appropriate will, because if you can go and take that money and now buy another 6plex, in the right market conditions, it is very easy to turn an initial investment of a 6, 8, 10plex into 50 to 100 doors over maybe a decade. And you might say, that sounds crazy. I don't think I can do it. But I can promise you it's been done time and time again. It just requires making sure you buy good properties that are fair priced with equity upside, being in the right place at the right time, taking advantage of those time frames, because at any time in those time frames, there's going to be times when a property is up in value and rents are up and interest rates are down, and pulling out that money to purchase more, right? And I always tell people, how do you think a guy with 1,000 doors came to have 1,000 doors? He didn't play for the Toronto Raptors and make $10 million a year and he just buy them. He started with a few doors and he refinanced and he got that value out. And I love this example. It's a real world name, a real world example. And he's a personal friend of my family, but his name is Angelo Butera, Panoramic Properties. And he came here way back in the day in the late 70s from Italy with barely a high school education. I think he never went past grade 7. He could barely speak English at the time. He came here, started working as a concrete former, figured out a couple good things and worked his way up, and basically was able to save up his money and buy a little apartment building. And then, what he did at the time, because the program wasn't even as good, is he used his construction knowledge to renovate the building, get a higher appraisal, and pull that equity out, and rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. You can Google Panoramic Properties. They have around $3.2 billion of assets under management as of 2025. So if a guy that came here in the 70s and can't speak English and never got past grade 7 can go from one little multiplex to $3.2 billion, the idea that people who potentially are doctors, dentists, lawyers can buy a multiplex and use refinancing and equity takeouts to own 50 doors in 10 years or 100 doors in 10 years, it's not something that should be unfathomable to people, right? And the key is, like, why I always ask people, why are you buying real estate? Why are you investing? Because to me, it doesn't actually make sense to buy something that you hope it goes up a few percent or you make $1,000 a month cash flow. Like, I'm not shitting on $1,000 a month of cash flow, but that's not substantially changing most people's lives, especially not when a steak at the grocery store costs $50, right? You need to grow that portfolio. And not everyone needs $3 billion. Not everyone needs 100 million. But once you at least have 30, 40, 50 doors, now you're talking about actually making differences in your life. Now you're talking about, I want to go to Miami for the weekend and bring my family business class, and it doesn't matter. I want to extend my vacation over Christmas for next week. It doesn't matter, because you have 30, 40, 50, 100, $200,000 a month coming in because you used equity takeouts and refinancing to grow your portfolio. And again, I'm not guaranteeing that. I'm not saying it will always work, but it can work if you're smart and you're strategic and you buy the right properties at the right time that have equity upside. And that's what we try to bring to our buyers. So, I didn't go to the next slide. I always forget to move through, but you can own an apartment building with $0, right? Or even sometimes, as I said, with negative dollars. It's like playing the game with cheat codes on. And again, when people say, sounds too good to be true, and that's my favorite line in this whole thing, it is kind of too good to be true, because the fair market, the open private markets would never do this. Only government intervention makes this program possible. So it is playing the game with cheat codes on, in the same way that green slush fund that they did with the Liberals, like, made people billions of dollars. Here we have a program that's actually accessible to the non-elites, to any Canadian citizen, where you can also take advantage of the government and play with the cheat codes on. And I'll tell you right now, I'm using it. I've bought 30 units in Edmonton since November of this year, and my goal is to continue buying nonstop. In fact, I just had to send a deposit today. I posted in one of our group chats. I accidentally didn't erase my personal information. I had to delete it and repost it because I don't know how to use technology. But now let's talk about Alberta, because what I just said there about the equity takeouts, the refinancing, I was very careful in my wording, saying it has to be in the right place at the right time or it's not going to work, right? And I can tell you right now that that's not going to work in Ontario today, and it's not going to work in most places today. There are definitely other places in Alberta it can work, but for me, I understand Alberta well, and I know it works the best. So why would I focus in areas where it doesn't work as well? The Alberta advantage. You know, this is their slogan. This is actually kind of their catchphrase. It's their provincial ethos, okay? And it refers to the features that differentiate Alberta from other Canadian provinces, specifically their efforts to attract private sector investment, reduce red tape for business, and diversify their economy. And this is their like current mission statement. If you Google it, it's like on their website and all that, right? I didn't just make it up, although it sounds pretty cool. But I lived in Alberta for a long time, and I can tell you they do have way less red tape. They have almost what you might call common sense, where not everything requires 17,000 forms to be done, right? It doesn't just extend to real estate, it kind of extends to their entire lifestyle belief system. And what does Alberta have going on with that ethos? Well, they have a massive technology hub and now a new AI center that's coming. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. Edmonton is on track to become the next biggest sort of tech hub in North America, really. I mean, they have a 50+% surge in technology employment over the last 5 years. And you can Google it. We didn't put an article in here. I don't like copying and pasting that often, but Northwest Alberta just landed the deal on a $70 billion with a B dollar data center for AI. It'll be the largest data center on the planet. Kevin O'Leary, love him or hate him, he was the one who was able to ink the deal and get that data center into Alberta. It will employ over 5,000 people in very high paying, sophisticated roles. Why did they choose Northern Alberta? I'll tell you one reason. AI takes an absolute shitload of energy to run. I mean, I don't know if you saw the news a while ago. Microsoft, who owns a part of OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, was actually looking at building their own nuclear plant, because the data centers to run AI take so much energy that they're literally energy limited. That is the factor that prevents like basically Terminator from happening. But why Northwest Alberta? Low taxes, low red tape, and guess what they have in the ground? A lot of energy available, right? They can easily supply the energy needed. 5,000 new jobs, high-paying jobs coming to Edmonton. And there's a high demand for housing. Alberta's population surged more than 4%. It's the fastest growth in Canada, with record high right now going on interprovincial migration. And I think this is extremely important to hit, this interprovincial migration component, because time and time again, I've talked to people and they go, you know, Alberta, it's boom and bust, it's boom and bust. You know, the 80s, the 2000s, the 2010s were all bust. Those were oil-driven cycles. In the past, and I lived in Alberta. I lived in Marda Loop, Calgary from 2004 to 2008, which was the wildest oil boom I've ever seen. It was like being in Vegas with like the richest people you've ever seen, except I was a poor student at the time. But those were oil-driven booms. What's happening in Alberta now is a fundamentally different situation. What it really is people are fed up with Ontario. They're fed up with BC. They're fed up with extremely high cost of living. They're fed up with a very, like, let's call it almost woke ideology. They want to live somewhere where instead of buying a studio condo, they can afford a detached home with the same money. They want to live somewhere where there isn't regulation and red tape on everything, and there's a more centrist kind of view and lifestyle. So what's happened with Calgary and Edmonton that are having this unbelievable growth is a very different situation than the past. It is not driven by oil. It is driven by a fundamental shift that people think Vancouver, Toronto, and even a little bit from Montreal are just overpriced. And I mean, it's a pretty strong pitch to me. You know, a guy working, especially with work from home, someone working at Amazon in Toronto making $150,000 a year can't even afford a townhouse. But in Alberta, they could buy a detached house. Like, where would you rather live? Plus, in Calgary, you got the mountains there. It's a really nice town, right? Edmonton is beautiful as well. So it's a fundamental shift that's not driven by oil. And the fact of the matter is now that we have Trump in the States, literally saying drill baby drill the other day, and we almost certainly have Polyev coming in, who's already said he wants to get the Trans Mountain done, he wants to get Energy East done, and he wants to get liquefaction plants for natural gas done, so we can actually start exporting our natural gas over to Europe, which Trudeau said there was no business case for. Wild guy. We're not even in an oil boom. Imagine what happens when you take all that migration and then you turn on the taps of Alberta oil. The place is basically a powder keg ready to go off. And again, I have purchased 30 doors there with a strong belief in this thesis. So CMHC plus CMHC MLI plus Alberta is solid gold. And I'll tell you now why. That's the Alberta side. Now let's talk about why it makes sense for rental housing. The affordability index is the key element of this. So if you remember way back up, because I talk a lot, but at the beginning of this presentation, we had affordability, accessibility, energy efficiency. We can get all of our points from affordability in Alberta because the affordability benchmark is calculated as a percentage of the incomes. In both Calgary and Edmonton, incomes are ridiculously high. And because they're high, you have high affordability. Edmonton now is 1665 and Calgary at 1740. To put it in perspective, most of Ontario is around 1200. So it costs more to build a house here and you can only rent the affordable units for 1200. Whereas in Edmonton 1665 or Calgary 1740, it means that your pro forma, your cash flow is not being crushed by super low affordable rents, which obviously makes a massive, massive difference, right? And that is a huge factor because we don't have to worry about the energy efficiency component. We don't have to worry about the accessibility component, both of which obviously building to a higher building code or building accessibility is just a higher code as well. That costs money. That's money that has to be put into the construction budget. We get the affordability, all of the points, 100 points from there for free because all of our small units are going to rent below 1665 in Edmonton or 1740 in Calgary, meaning there's literally no cost. The market rent for those units is lower than the affordability, whereas in Ontario it would be inverted. You'd be crushed. You'd be $400 or $500 under the market. And that is a huge, huge factor. It is a wild factor. And that's why I said that it's kind of this twilight zone of everything lining up. But that's not all that makes Alberta attractive. You have low costs and fees. And this one is the one that I think, I don't even say Alberta's good. I say we're being literally abused in Ontario, okay? Like I am of the belief, and there's a lot of builders actually in Ontario running massive campaigns right now. We are being abused. The government here is literally abusing you. It's not that Alberta's good. It's that you have been trained over years. You have basically been gaslit by the Ontario government and the Ontario municipalities that it's okay to have these things. Alberta does not have a land transfer tax. They do not have development charges. They do not have municipal hookup charges. They do not have parkland dedication section 37s like we have here, where you can add hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to the cost of a house. I'm sure you guys have all seen the reports that in Ontario, housing can 40% of the cost of a new house might be taxes and fees. In BC and Vancouver, it might even be over 50% when you add in everything. Don't forget that the GST and the HST and the PST, all of that, you're being taxed on all those fees too, right? So it's like, how are you supposed to economically viably rent a project in Ontario if 40% of the cost is fees? It should be, all costs should be cement and 2x4s and marble countertops, right? If 40% of your cost of a new home is just fees, you're screwed. Like that is such a large chunk that isn't going to square footage you can rent that it is irrecoverable. Not to mention that these things all have to come out of your pocket, right? CMHC in Ontario may finance some of this stuff, but you have to pay it first, wait for your building permits, and then get it back, which means you need to have the money on hand. In Alberta, you don't have any of these problems, right? And so what you end up with is lower costs to build and none of the fees. And then the final part, and I hesitate to write it this way, is landlord-friendly policies. Because again, I don't think that Alberta has landlord-friendly policies. I think they have policies that aren't gaslighting you or abusing you. They're fair policies. Nobody should be able to stay in a house if they don't pay rent for 8 or 9 months, right? So Alberta does not have rent control. You are allowed to collect security deposits on top of your first and last month's rent. You're allowed to enforce if a building is pet friendly or not. And if someone wants a pet, you're allowed to charge them extra fees for it. Most importantly, evictions are 14 days, worst case. Most of the evictions we see in Alberta happen in 9 or 10 days. You don't pay your rent, you're out, right? Like why did, like, I don't know, I could go on to my therapist for a month about this. Like, why are people allowed to stay in homes in Ontario for years? Not months, not weeks, years. You in the
Years,
news, in the news the other day was a lady who couldn't get in her own condo that she bought for 4 years while the tenant trashed the place and did not pay $55,000 of rent. This is a broken system in Ontario. What's happening in Alberta is not a system for landlords, it's common sense. If someone doesn't pay rent, you're out in 2 weeks. Even if they appeal it, they can only stay a maximum of 28 days while the appeal is heard. And the only valid appeal is proof of payment. There's no appeal for, oh, I lost my job or I'm having a mental health crisis. You know, like, that is not valid. It's either you paid your rent or you didn't, period. You're out in 9 days, 10 days, 14 days at the maximum. So what does that mean? It means, I think that when we look at cash flows on Ontario projects that show 3%, 4% bad debt and vacancy, we should be using 20% bad debt and vacancy in Ontario, because one bad tenant can royally screw you. Whereas in Alberta, at most, in a worst case scenario, if you go through an appeal, you're looking at 4 weeks. In 99% of cases, you're looking at 14 days. But I'll tell you the crazy thing. Most people pay their rent. You know why? Because if you know the system actually will get rid of you, then you don't play games. There's no professional tenants. There's no people abusing the system, using all the different systems in the landlord-tenant board to keep delaying hearings and all these other things, because they know that things like that don't work. And the same with the security deposits. When we get into some of the cash flow analysis below, we have a line item for repairs and maintenance. We have to. CMHC wants to see it. But if you have a security deposit and you have a brand new building, you shouldn't have any repairs and maintenance. If there's something wrong with the building, it's under warranty. If there's something wrong with the tenant, you're deducting it from their security deposit. So why would you have any repairs and maintenance at a new building, right? Whereas I own 2 buildings in Ontario. Every tenant turnover, I budget $500 for repairs and maintenance. And yeah, I could try to take them to the landlord-tenant board, but good luck. $187 to apply. I'm not going to sit there. I got to pay a paralegal. And even if I get a judgment, how am I going to collect it? You might as well just write it off and call it cost of business. That's your line, repairs and maintenance in the building. So it's really the magic formula. As I said, the Twilight Zone magic formula, perfect thing. I mean, maybe that's the Alberta advantage, is low regulation, low red tape, low taxes, and fair and balanced laws. You have strict tenant laws, you have low delivery costs, you have favorable financing terms. When you put that all together, you end up with stable, high cash flow, and you can do it with extremely low deposits. It's really just the winning formula, or the magic formula, or whatever you want to call it. So the other important thing, and I'm not big on high pressure sales tactics or anything like that, but how long can opportunities like this exist? Because MLI and the program CMHC has offered has been around in various forms going back to the 60s. I mean, even if you look around Toronto, a lot of the older buildings you see, those like 1960s, 1970s apartment buildings, they were all built with whatever versions of the program existed at the time, because the first major housing crisis was after World War II, when we had the baby boomers and there wasn't enough homes. What's happening now is way more extreme, because we're letting like 1 million people in a year. But MLI is right now kind of the loosest it's ever been in history, with 5% deposit, 50-year loans, bond rate interest. The program is being utilized like crazy, and I promise you that somewhere there's a regulator, a banking regulator, kind of shitting their pants saying, maybe we're being too crazy with this, right? And there will come a day when the party ends. And when I say the party ends, to be clear, if you already are approved and you already have the financing, you're good. You're good for your 50 years. They're not going to pull the rug on a deal that's done. But we don't know the day that they're going to say, we're not doing 95-5 anymore. We're only doing 90-10, or we're only doing 80-20, or we're no longer doing this on small projects, $1.5, $2 million. We're only going 5 million, 10 million, whatever, right? And we don't know how much longer Edmonton and Alberta are going to have these super favorable laws. There's so many things that are right now. So it's not really the time to risk not buying if you believe in this type of product, because 6 months from now, you might be getting 90-10 deals. Like, the writing is on the wall for how good this program is, especially with guys like me having webinars every week with 100 people in it saying, make a shitload of money off of this program. Eventually, every good thing gets ruined by the government for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, right? I would argue they should be happy we're bringing awareness, because the entire purpose of this program is to get housing built. And if we're doing it the right way, with proper property management, approved designs, proper zoning, legal units, then why would they want to shut it down? But that's how the government works. So how long will this exist? I don't know. Policies are tightening all the time already. Rates are going up potentially. We've seen bond rates increase. And especially with the tariff war that might happen, we don't know what could happen with rates in the future, right? Today it works, tomorrow it may not. And the biggest risk people have right now is potentially missing out on like the best financing terms that might exist in our lifetime. And we see it already changing. Applications now, they're being much tighter with every element of the application. And luckily, we're just not realtors in a vacuum. We're saying buy, buy, buy. We are working extremely closely with the lenders and the brokers to make sure every application we submit will work. And if someone won't work, we won't sell them something because, again, like we have an alignment with the buyer. I'm not making any money unless they're making money. So I don't want applications to blow up in my face. We've really tightened up on how much liquidity we want, how much net worth we want, how conservative we are with the rents and the expenses because we want to ensure we don't have any issues with CMHC. So as I say, friss oder stirb, you can adapt or you can die. And right now, in my opinion, these are the best risk-adjusted returns that you can get in real estate. At the end of the day, everything is always a trade-off between risk and return. If you want something that has no risk, go buy a government bond, right? If you want something that has insane risk, go buy Trump coin. It might go up 10 million% tomorrow. Might not, but probably won't. But if you want something that I think is overall relatively safe, that has the potential for high returns, then I think CMHC MLI Select is kind of the best opportunity. So, you can sink or swim, adapt or die. You guys decide. I'm just here to offer you the product and make sure you understand how it works. So let's look at an example of a project. It's funny, we actually had 6 of these 5-plexes, but we just sold the last one today. So now we don't have any of them, but I'll still show you an example. And this is actually a bit of an outdated pro forma. We've added more information on our new pro formas so that people can very clearly see their liquidity requirements and everything else. I thought most people could do the math in their head, but I want to make it as easy as possible for people. And also my marketing person told me I needed to make it prettier, so we've done that since now. But essentially, here's a little 5-plex. It's in Keswick, which is a suburban area of Edmonton. The purchase price with this builder is $1.455. When you get into commercial lending, there are bank and broker fees. And what we do is we work with builders to roll them into the cost so that they can be financed rather than having them be an out-of-pocket expense. So here's your worst case scenario on the fees. What we do, you will never have a fee higher than about 2.5%. Most likely it will be substantially lower, probably around 1.5 or 1.25%. But there are cases, maybe the lender's in a bad mood that day or whatever, that you could end up at 2.5. So by rolling in 2.5, we're protecting the buyer. And essentially they're being rebated anything at the end. So if there's a much lower fee, they're actually getting a bit of a rebate on their equity on day one. So that's why that is there. Now this deal is a 5% down deal, meaning that all in, you need a deposit of call it $75,000. Here's our rents. This is a semi-detached product with legal basements and garden suites. And basically, one side of the house has a 3-bedroom upper. The other side of the house has a 4-bedroom upper. You have the 2 basement units and you have 1 garden suite. That's how you get your 5 doors. These are basically the rents CMHC wants to use. I can promise you, basically, in today's market, we can get higher rents than this. In fact, I have posted in our group chats and on our Google Drive examples of real leases from similar neighborhoods that are at higher rents. I don't put them here because if I put $2,600 for a 3-bed upper, CMHC might impose rental achievement on us. Rental achievement means that they will give you the loan, but they're going to hold back until they actually see you hit those numbers on closing. I don't want to add risk for my buyers. You can still rent this for whatever the heck the market supports, but we're using the numbers that we know CMHC will be happy with and will avoid getting hit with RA. And I know a lot of people think, oh my God, I've seen the news, everyone has RA now. RA is discretionary. It is at the will and decision of the adjudicator. On the last 13 files we have submitted, we only got hit with rental achievement on 2. On one of those files, we knew it was going to happen because the buyer was being unreasonable. But if they want to do it, we do it. We told them they'll get rental achievement. They got it. It's their problem. The other file made absolutely no sense. We appealed it to the management at CMHC and it was removed. So we are pretty good with the teams we're working with. We're not perfect. No one can be. And CMHC is a little bit Mickey Mouse in their process. So anything can happen. But we know how not to poke the bear, right? And as long as you stay under a certain threshold of not being ridiculous, you generally avoid a lot of headaches. Below this, so you have a total, effective gross rent of about $107,000. You have all of your expenses here, which net out to about $25,000, $26,000 a year, and that gives you a net operating income of approximately $80,000. Now, some people might say, oh, I think property taxes are higher, or insurance is lower, or repairs and maintenance, blah, blah, blah. These are all either benchmark or real-world example from the same neighborhood. And in terms of the management and salaries, we also have a mandate from one of our property managers that this is the rate they will charge on any project we bring to them. So any buyer of ours is free to go and shop around for different property management, but I can tell you that 5.25 plus 500 a door per year is pretty darn good rate, but you're not obligated to use them. You can always shop around, and if you find better, go for it, right? Let's talk about some of these costs, because as I mentioned, realistically on a brand new building with a 10-year Alberta warranty, just like Ontario, the warranty covers less and less over time, but year one is bumper to bumper, okay? So in your first year alone, you should have no repairs and maintenance. Building defect is the builder's problem. Anything the tenant does is their problem through security deposits. And 90% of the issues you're going to have over time are tenant-related issues, and you can hit them on the security deposit, and that should be close to zero or zero. And again, guess what happens in Alberta? Most tenants leave units in good shape because there's a security deposit, as opposed to Ontario, where they, I don't know, heard crazy stories. They throw their ground beef in the vents and stuff. Like, it's wild. Other costs. And this is kind of stuff like your accounting and maybe marketing and other things. But generally on small projects, this would actually be much lower. You're really just filing a tax return every year. And replacement reserve. Replacement reserve is your long-term capital savings towards major capital work, right? Replacing a roof after 30 years, new boiler system, windows, doors, etc. Things that will cost you tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. The theory being you're saving a little bit of money every year, but you're putting it in like a government bond or a GIC, and it will grow so that in 30 years you easily can cover those costs. If you are planning to cycle your capital in 5 years, which most people in these deals are typically trying to aim for, you don't need to maintain a replacement reserve. It is not a mandate from CMHC. We have to put it in our pro forma so that this thing looks proper and actually encompasses all possible operating expenses. But if I'm cycling my capital in 5 years or less, why would I keep a replacement reserve? It's the next guy's problem, right? And that might come out in the sale as an adjusted final price based on depreciation, but you don't need to save that money on day one. Even then, it's not really an expense. It's money you're saving in your pocket for later, and maybe you do better in other investments with it than you expected. Below the, oops, I forgot that I'm scrolling through a document. Below that, we have our actual mortgage. So we have our mortgage plus the CMHC premium, which is 2.8%, 50-year AM. Here's our carrying costs in that mortgage, and here's our cash flow after debt. You can see this has approximately a 17.5% cash on cash return and that debt service coverage of almost 1.2. So well above the minimum required, of 1.1. You have a 9% safety margin there and a nice healthy cap rate of a high 5% cap, right? And remember, this is a 19 debt service with inflated expenses and lower rents than I can see in similar projects in the neighborhood. But that's a good thing, because this project's going to take 6 to 7 months to be delivered. And what happens if the rental market changes a bit, right? There's a lot of uncertainty out there right now. So knowing that you have a healthy margin and you're using conservative numbers means that a lot of shit would have to go wrong before you end up negative cash flow, right? So you want to make, when you do a project like this, your real goal, obviously you want a cash flow, but your real goal is to basically zero the chance you're losing money every month. So when you have such a healthy margin, nothing in this world is certain other than death and taxes, but you have a very confident feeling that you're not going to end up in a very bad position. And we kind of analyze that below. So I'll jump into this 5-year outlook in a minute, but let's look at the rate sensitivity and the rent sensitivity. So we run this through a +5 and plus 50 bips and minus 50 bips kind of sensitivity, because right now bond rates did go up a little bit, spreads went up a little bit, so you might be getting a rate lock around 4.2 and then hopefully closing below 4. Assuming that rates continue to fall downwards, which bonds have been trending downwards with weird spikes every time Trump tweets something, right? But again, we're in a very uncertain time because if he throws tariffs, they go up. And I'll explain the rate locks in a minute. Even at a 50 bip increase, you're still above the minimums for CMHC at 112 debt service, meaning that in a worst case scenario, you've probably heard in other webinars about rate buy downs and other things like that, you would be pretty safe because we're doing rate locks right now around 4.25. We're not even close to the 50 bips. And then if we look at the input rent, the rent sensitivity, you would have to end up at negative 15% rents from what we're projecting to be basically breaking even on this project. And if you lost $1,200 per year, that's $100 per month, you're still paying off about $9,000 of principal, so you're not even losing money. But if 6 months from now, rents are 15% lower than the CMHC numbers we're using that are 10 or 15% lower than the rents we're seeing in the real world, then really bad shit has gone down. So realistically, when you factor in that the actual rents we're getting are higher, that the expenses we have in real projects are slightly lower, and that you're also paying off about $9,000 per year in your principal, to actually be in an overall negative position per year you'd probably have to have like a 30 to 35% lower rent before you were actually losing money on a project. So we put quite a bit of buffer into these things. Again, nothing in the world can be 100% guaranteed, but it's about as damn certain as it can be, and that's why I'm buying these as well. So just to explain the rate lock, because I was sitting in a webinar from some mortgage brokers, and I like to listen to other webinars to see what they're saying. Unfortunately, and I'm not saying I'm perfect by any means, I hear a lot of crazy shit that's just wrong, and it blows my mind. I heard them say that you can use your credit cards as liquidity, which is definitely not true, and that one really shocked me. It was so shocking that I double checked with our broker, who laughed, because I thought maybe I was crazy. But the other thing they said is that the biggest risk in CMHC right now is rates are going up and down every week. And that's true, rates are going up and down every week. But every single deal we do, we recommend our client as a rate lock. And the rate lock means that the day of the application, we can get that available rate today. And all they have to do is put a deposit, because that way the bank can reserve those bonds for this rate, right? And that deposit is refunded to them. It comes out of the lender fees. So they're not even spending money. They're just putting money, because that way the bank knows they're going to actually go with that loan. Obviously, if they don't go with the loan, they lose that deposit. But then you're getting a ceiling rate. So if you get a rate lock today at 4.3, it does not matter if rates go up to 30. Your maximum rate that you will get on the day of your closing is 4.3, right? But if the bonds go down in the meantime, or if the spreads tighten because there's more credit out there, you will get the lowest rate available at the day of closing. So when I hear mortgage brokers say, oh, rates are all over the place, I mean, that's not really a concern, because you're locking a maximum rate. And we can say if you're at 4.3 as your absolute ceiling rate, and I'm still getting 117 debt service, then I'm not really stressing, right? And if bonds continue down, or if credit spreads continue down, maybe you end up at 3.5 or 3.75, and then you're just literally, printing money and partying. So I'm not worried about that. The other thing they said is that it is almost impossible to get lending on loans under $2 million. And that is something that I've heard going around for a very long time. And it's kind of like an old wives' tale, like you don't want to swim for 30 minutes after you eat. And it is true that a lot of lenders will not look at loans under $2 million. And in fact, a lot of lenders that were even doing the 1.5s, 1.6s, 2 millions before, suddenly a few weeks ago raised their credit spreads. And for those who don't know what a spread is, basically there's the bond rate, and then the lender has to add a profit, right? Because if they just gave the loan at the bond rate, they're not making any money. It used to be around on big loans around 60 basis points, so 0.6%, and on big loans maybe around 0.8. And all overnight, a bunch of these lenders, it was almost like a Telus and Bell thing where they all colluded, but overnight we saw all of these small loans, credit spreads went to like 1.5 to 1.8. That's huge, because if the bond rate is 3.3 and you went from plus 0.7, which would get you around 4, to plus 1.8, holy shit, you're like in the high fives, maybe even in the sixes. Like, that is crushing to you, right? Well, the good news is because we actually give a shit about our clients, and we are very in tune with what's going on out there, is that we secured ourselves our own vertically integrated lender. So we have a private fund, a guy who got his CMHC approval to be a lender back in November, who has given us a guaranteed, similar to our property management, we have a mandate where he will never charge us more than 0.95 spread, no matter how small the loan is, as long as it qualifies for CMHC. And he will not reject any loans, no matter how small they are, as long as they qualify for CMHC. Obviously, he's probably hoping we bring him some bigger loans too. But the point is that we can comfortably go to our clients now, and that's how we can ensure, with bonds sitting around 3.25 today, I haven't checked recently, but they're around 3.24 yesterday, that at a 0.95 spread, you're only sitting at 4.2 as your ceiling rate. Whereas if we were going to other lenders like Peak Hill or ICI or something like that, we might be giving people a ceiling rate over 5, and that just kills the project. So yes, it is possible to get small loans. No, you don't need to worry about interest rates fluctuating all over the place if you're rate locking at the beginning. And the other thing is that, we have worked, again, going back to that turnkey thing, to ensure that we can offer lending that will work for every project that isn't abusing the client with huge credit spreads. So the last thing to look at here is kind of this 5-year projection. And I hate 5-year projections. Every agent puts these things in pro formas, and you can do a 20-year projection. I don't know, I can make up a 200-year projection, but like, where are we going to be in 5 years? And then if you go back and think what was 5 years ago, was COVID was just becoming the cool kid on the block. Like, a lot changes in a 5-year period. We have 2 Olympics in a 5-year period. So why do I do it? Well, number one, someone needs to have some concept of what they're doing over time. But the most important year for me is year one. And you might say, why is there a 10% appreciation there and a building value of 1.6 million? Any project Meta sells, any listing you want to say that we offer in our inventory sheets, at minimum, we will get appraised 10% higher. And the reason is because if you as a buyer or you as an agent recommending things to a buyer is going to be pushing your purchaser to buy pre-construction, there needs to be a reason why. And obviously one reason is we can design the building to maximize the program, but the other reason is you're taking on this construction risk. You're not closing for 6 months, 8 months, 10 months. There better be something there for you. So we ensure the builders we work with leave some of the juice for the buyer, right? There are builders out there. I've seen a shitload of other people's listings where they are selling them at the appraised value. People think, oh, that's fair. They're selling at the appraised value. That's bullshit. You're being ripped off. Why would you pay for something pre-construction if you're not getting some value there? So for example, these sixplexes, we put 10%, 1.6 million, selling them at 1.491 million. These are coming in with appraisals around 1.63. So it's actually 30,000 higher than I'm showing here, right? Because I don't want to have to adjust this thing every time I get an appraisal. I just say you're going to have at least 10% upside in the equity on day one. And I will not sell a project that doesn't meet those requirements. And we underwrite everything and pre-appraise things before we bring them to market. And I reject, you can ask Agnes, she's sitting beside me. She does all the work around here. We reject 80% of the projects we look at. She has to write the pro forma every single one. Then we send it to the underwriter to tweak anything we might have screwed up. And then we have to remember which ones we wanted to launch and which ones we don't want to launch. And our Google sheet is so freaking big now, it barely loads. And then the funny part is I see those projects we rejected being sold by other people. Great deal, amazing deal. And I'm like, well, if the buyers buy that, they're totally fucked. Like, they're not going to be close to 95% down. They're going to be at 90% down or maybe even 85% down. I'll give you an example. We don't sell a lot of Calgary because it's very hard to find well-priced projects in Calgary that will paper properly. A lot of guys in Calgary are pumping 8plexes for 3.5, 3.6 million. The only 2 8plexes I've sold in Calgary since November, one was 2.9 million, one was 3.1 million. If you're buying an 8plex in Calgary at 3.5 million, I'm sorry, you're fucked. There's no other way to say it. If you bought one, I'm sorry. Good luck. Because you're going to be at 85% loan to value probably. You're not going to even be at 90% loan to value. The problem is there's a lot of guys out there who will take advantage of the fact that Ontario investors think everything looks cheap in Alberta, and it does compared to Ontario prices, but that doesn't mean you can just overpay, right? And people say, what are the best areas to invest in? What are the worst areas to invest in? I don't give a shit about the area. All that matters is the price, because you can buy in a shitty neighborhood if the price justifies it, right? You could also accidentally buy in a nice neighborhood and pay way too much money, and then what really matters is what price can you get relative to those rents? Will it paper properly, right? So we are very cautious and we want to ensure that we're able to easily paper deals that are in that 120 range. And only in very special cases, we'll see debt services down 115, 116. Maybe the project's in a really good neighborhood and someone really wants it, or there's something other special things about it. But we're extremely cautious with this stuff. Every deal that we paper is going to be underwritten properly first. And like, if I send a project to our underwriter that wouldn't paper and I try to push it with him, he would be like, I'm not submitting that to CMHC. It'll ruin my reputation, because his reputation is on the line as well. He can be banned from the program if he submits bad stuff, because the way the brokers and underwriters work is they have to work through their correspondence through a lender. The lenders will not deal with them if they do shitty work, because they don't want them clogging up the system. So everyone in this chain, at least in Meta, is extremely cautious, because number one, we're introducing people to something that a lot of investors don't know anything about, and they have to trust us. And we also don't make any money if these projects fall apart, right? If you buy this and it doesn't paper, then the buyer's not going to close. They're going to lose their deposit. They're going to hate me, and we're not getting paid anyway. So we all just did all this 4 or 5 months of work for nothing. What's the point? So we have alignment with our buyers. And personally, I mean, it probably doesn't matter much, but I sleep well at night with the projects we sell, because I actually want people to make money, right? And I know that these projects will not lose the money, and most of them are going to cash flow for them unbelievably well, right? And that's just us being cautious on pricing, cautious on area, and also cautious on the builders we work with. We basically research the shit out of any builder before we start working with them. We make sure that they're good with our terms and conditions of low deposits, rolling in the fees, the terms they want on their contracts, that kind of stuff, so that we can try to protect our buyers as much as possible. Anyway, that's it. I've been talking for like over an hour. I'm sure everyone is bored. Probably half the people have signed off. We'll turn it over for questions now, and we can go for there.
I appreciate your capacity to speak that long.
I know, right?
Trust me, my wife doesn't think so. All right, so I see some questions in the chat which we'll hit, and then anyone else can ask questions. There's also
I'm the second time today. Maybe I got misunderstanding because last week I came here. I
Yeah.
was thinking the same way.
yeah, we had a few people show up in person because what we're trying to do
But
is one in person,
last
one.
week a lot of people were here.
Correct. Yeah, there was like 300 people here.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll do
There
the.
were no rooms.
Let's see the questions. What is the breakdown of price of the buildings? I'm not sure what that question means exactly. Are you asking what are the construction costs or the land prices or anything like that? Those can be provided on a specific project if we get that far into it. But you have to also remember these are turnkey projects, Hajmir, right? So essentially, as I said, in the same way that you're not asking Tridel how much they paid for the land or how much it cost them to pour concrete, you're happy with the overall price or you're not, right? And essentially, if you think the pricing is wrong, then I would recommend going and buying your own land and going through the pain of building. But generally, that can be provided. Even 2,300 on the high side for Edmonton now. I mean, Edmonton was one of the only two cities in Canada that had rent increases in the recent rental report with CMHC. It was Edmonton and Quebec City. Quebec City had crazy increases. I don't really know why. I don't know anything about Quebec City. But as I said, Alona, we have real rents in hand signed over the last couple months and even into November that are for similar projects in similar neighborhoods that are even substantially higher than this. So we can easily get these rents right now. One of the interesting things that's happened is that CMHC did a terrible job in its reports and they're just not even accurate. Like I've seen literally CMHC reports on rents in neighborhoods where they're saying the rents are X and we have signed leases in that neighborhood that are hundreds of dollars per month higher. So the rents are definitely reasonable. Plus utilities. Yeah, generally these small buildings will have separate utilities per structural unit essentially, right? So what I mean by that is if it's like a townhouse with an upper and a lower, you'll have 1 meter for that whole townhome. And then so if it's 10 doors with an upper or lower, there's going to be 5 meters. We can individually meter every single unit, but the cost in Edmonton, it's a really weird thing to run a second line for the metering is very expensive. It's like $20,000. So generally it doesn't make sense to individually meter them because the additional cost will take 30 years to recover. What we typically do is we just split the utilities on a per square foot basis with the upper and lower tenant. Hi Josh, my name's Jake, but that's okay. What percentage of the fiveplex is designated to be affordable housing? 25% has to be affordable, right? And that's why we easily are there because of the basement units and the garden suite, easily being under that $1,665 per month. And again, we go for the 25% because with Edmonton rents being so high, Edmonton affordable being so high and the rents on smaller or basement units being relatively low, we're well under that that sort of threshold where we're not getting killed by the market opportunity. Sean just said, thank you. You're welcome. Victor says, what cities have the best opportunities for MLI Select? Right now, we're heavily focused in Edmonton. Calgary, we can find good opportunities. Rarely, when they come, they usually sell in about a microsecond. I do have another project coming in Elbow Drive Southwest soon from a good builder friend of mine. We already sold 2 for him, and he's going to launch this next one, and I can promise you it will paper because I keep yelling at him to lower the price every day. $1 million listing. So when the buyer is getting qualified, do the pre-construction purchases get added to their net worth? If the pre-con has not closed yet, deposits get calculated or value of unit for nothing. So I think the question is basically like, is the deposit part of the net worth or liquidity? Not really, right? Because they consider the deposit to live inside the deal. So the net worth and the liquidity is kind of outside of that. Once the project is done, then it will be counted towards it. Could you resume how to enter the program? I don't know what that means exactly.
I'm gonna drop a link for them to fill out a form if they.
Oh, sure. Devin says, have you looked at any stats in Central Alberta, rent lots acquisitions, any hurdles? So Central Alberta being between Edmonton and Calgary, I have not. I know the problem is once you leave the major city centers in Alberta, that the affordable benchmarks drop off a cliff, and that creates a massive challenge. Like Red Deer, you might find projects that have extremely low cost, but the affordable rent, I believe, is $900. So you're going to get absolutely crushed there. And if I'm wrong on that, it's from memory, so I apologize. What's the difference between what you guys are doing and everyone else selling CMHC? I don't know. I think we're more fun in our webinars, probably. As I said, we are very much in touch with the metal, as the expression goes. Like we are talking with the brokers, we're talking with the lenders every single day, the underwriters every single day. We are constantly making sure these projects will work. And if any issues arise or changes with the programs arise, we pull that inventory until we know that it's sellable. The other thing is, as I mentioned, is we do not sell at appraised value. We sell below appraisals because the only factor that's going to matter in the successful outcome is making sure that there's equity upside in the deal, right? So what I think we do that's important, and I'm not saying we're the only ones doing it, is we're very much aligned with, I want the buyers to have the best outcome, right? I think that especially in commercial real estate, it's not a greed game. One, the builder doesn't need to make too much, the agent doesn't need to make too much. Everyone can make good money with and leave fat for everyone in the process. Great presentation. Thank you for your time. What about personal unsecured lines of credit for liquidity? Yeah, those are liquidity. Absolutely. Liquidity is liquidity. If you can turn it into cash, you turn it into cash. As long as, one note, I forgot to mention in the presentation, any of these things we're counting for net worth, liquidity, et cetera, have to be in Canadian assets. They cannot be out of country. So you can have a guy, I like to use the expression, like he can be the other side of the Detroit River with $50 million in his bank account, and they will see that as $0, right? So it has to be in Canadian assets, Canadian homes, Canadian. You can have American stocks, but they're in a Canadian trading account, right? Like they're with TD or whatever. They have to be in Canadian assets. Do we get to see the plans and stuffs? Absolutely. We have a whole Google Drive where we keep all of that stuff, and we have a live inventory sheet that explains where every project is, the price, the timelines, the deposit requirements, et cetera, et cetera. Agnes is working the chat, so she can link you all that stuff while I just talk and talk. I get the fun job. Will there be too much supply with so many investing? Can you sell at any time, or what are the rules and penalties? Will there be too much supply? I don't think so. People always go, holy crap, there's so much being built, but it's all about relative to the number of bodies essentially that are in the country or joining an area, right? I mean, even in Toronto, where we've now had this sort of crash in the condo market, we're actually in an interesting corner because we desperately still need housing, but it doesn't make economic sense to build it. Right now, both Calgary and Alberta still have a bit of a housing shortage, and the number of people joining Edmonton, which is around 50 to 60,000 per year, and we're only building 12, 13,000 homes, it's going to go up probably a little bit. We're still short, right? Will that change over time? I don't know. I mean, obviously it can, but generally it's not the sales that limits the supply. It's the trade's ability to build it. I mean, even in Toronto, when we were selling 30,000 condos a year, they couldn't build them all. So I think we have, especially in Edmonton, probably 24 months more of good upside. And I could tell you that my other theory on that is that the average single family home price that seems to be supportable by the average Canadian is around 700,000, right? If you want to buy your own single family home. And what happened in Calgary is prices rapidly rose over the last 5 years. Once they got to around 700K, they leveled off. Edmonton, you can still buy a single family detached home for like yourself, a starter home in the 500s, which means that there's probably 150, maybe even 200,000 of upside before the average income of a family can no longer afford a detached home. And I think that all other pricing kind of drives from that, meaning that there's probably still substantial upside in both the rents and in house prices in general in Edmonton. And that's why I'm bullish. I put my money where my mouth is, but I'm also wrong all the time, according to my wife. So I don't know. Any more questions there? Can you assign the whole building or sell it in the first year of completion? Yes, you can assign these, absolutely, as long as the new buyer qualifies for the loan, right? We actually did an assignment right before Christmas. It was actually one of our broker's deals. He had bought a bunch of them and he had a bit of a capital crisis, so he couldn't get all of them done. So we were able to assign one of his. It took us like 40 seconds to sell it because it was already pre-leased, closing in 3 months, and it was sold at a lower price, and the new price could still fully support the rents, and we were even able to raise the price a little bit and get some of his deposit out. So the buyer was extremely happy. And trust me, once you have a fully pre-leased building, there's a million people who will line up and buy that, even at a premium, because if you now have de-risked the building, you already know the rent, the real rents can be there, and you already know the building's almost done construction, then you can assign it at basically the appraised price, because you deserve, as the person who took on the pre-con risk, to make your juice at that point. There was another question, part of that. Is there penalties to leaving the program? When you are in CMHC MLI, you have to maintain that building for 10 years with the affordable rents, right? But you can sell the whole project together. What you can't do is break it up or condoize it or anything like that, because that would just be kind of a hack around building a building, right? So you need to sell it as a whole project. all CMHC loans are assumable, which means that a new buyer can take them over, and then you could, if the price was up substantially, you could use pari passu to top up, to 90 or 95%, depending on conditions. So if you break it, there's definitely going to be penalties. Obviously, you would have the loan penalties from the lender, and also you would get banned from CMHC for life. And when they ban you, they do not ban you by the corporation, they ban you by your personal name. So that'll be it. Don't bite the hand that feeds, because it's not worth trying to trick them and screw around with the affordable rents or sell it off because you screw up on one project and you're done. So, it's not a good idea. Thank you so much, Jake. Also, one more question. Can you assign the whole building? I think just answered that. There's no limitations on assignment. As long as you are offloading the entire product and it's staying as a purpose-built rental with the affordable rents, it's totally fine. Is HELOC liquidity if it sits in your savings for 90 days? You don't need it to sit in your savings. HELOC, as I said, a line of credit is liquidity, right? Like the bank doesn't, CMHC doesn't care how you have access to the money. They just want to know you have access to the money. The reason they want liquidity is for if shit hits the fan, essentially, right? Like think about it. They want to know that if for some reason something goes $1 over budget, you're not going bankrupt off of that. So what they ask for is that 10% liquidity means that you have a healthy shit hitting the fan margin. It also shows them that you're just generally financially capable, right? They want to know, like, I can't even think of reasons why you'd end up in that situation, but they want to know that you have a long, powerful runway to manage a project if something went horribly wrong, essentially. Have you done larger size projects? Do they make more sense financially? Yes, we've done projects as big as 180 units, some that are, 120, 60, 70 units, that kind of thing. It's kind of a more complicated discussion because the small projects have extremely fast timelines. Some quick closing might even be 4 or 5 months. Most of them are 6 to 8 months. The worst case on these ones is like 10 to 11, 12 months. But basically every small project we do, like 20, 30 units or less, closes within inside of a year. When you get into the big sort of like purpose-built rental buildings that look like a building with elevators and amenity spaces, you're looking at, 18 to 36 month delivery, usually closer 24 to 36 months. Problem is, even if you have efficiencies in that building because you have a lower cost of building a whole building at once, even if your operating costs are a little bit lower because you're only heating 4 outside walls with all these units and you have all these other efficiencies, you can kill any absolute return upside by the time return. Because let's say you can make 10%, I'm just using simple numbers, but if you can make 10% in 6 months or you can make 30% in 3 years, 10% in 6 months is a higher return, right? That's 20% annualized, whereas 30% over 3 years, I can't do that math in my head as an IRR, but it's less than, it's like probably like 8% annualized IRR if you work it backwards. So my personal belief is that you're better off buying multiple smaller mid-sized projects than putting all your eggs into one big one. But the guys who buy the big ones are usually guys who already own a shitload of apartment buildings, and it's just not worth their time to manage 20 units or 30 units, and they're just seeing this as growing their large portfolio, right? So everyone's got different needs and different opinions. Most people, unless you're sitting on a lot of money, it's probably just better to buy a few smaller ones. The other nice thing about smaller ones is if you diversify the locations, buy one in North Edmonton, South Edmonton, East, West, then you're kind of de-risking if one neighborhood underperforms or overperforms, right? So it helps in that regard too. And that's my personal strategy, kind of. There's a lot of more comments. Any real estate agent across Canada sell your CMHC product? Sure, why not? I don't even care if you're a real estate agent, really. Is GST included in the price on top of the price? GST is separate. We do not show our performance with GST because in Canada there is currently a 100% purpose-built rental rebate. Unfortunately, because the government is the government, you have to pay the GST and then you get it rebated by the CRA. In theory, it should be 3 months, but I will tell you right now, they're kind of like the passport office, and I don't think you'll be getting your check in 3 months. The reason we do not include it in the pro forma is just like any other earnings you would see on a publicly traded company or something like that. We cannot work within what the tax elements are because they vary from province to province, that kind of thing. We look at the absolute dollars. You will eventually get that money back. Most buyers can easily pay the GST since they're at 10% liquidity anyway. Every buyer we explain this to ahead of time. And we also have financing available if someone needs to finance that GST over short run, which if you want to be a lender on that is the safest loan on the planet. Because if you have the approved CMHC loan, this guy's closing and they're getting the CRA rebate, then it's basically a risk-free loan if you want to lend against GST. What's my contact? Agnes can write it in the group chat. Or you can just Google me, maybe. I don't know. Just curious, if everyone makes good money, why they will rent rather than buy? I think you meant to say, why would the builders sell the projects rather than keep them from themselves? Is- I mean, for renter, if everyone makes good money, why would they rent rather than buy? For the renter, well, the renters don't have the money to buy, man. Like that's, some people don't have money to buy. That's why people live in apartment buildings. If you're asking why the builders don't keep them from themselves, every single builder I work with keeps a shitload of these for themselves. But building is a slow process. You have to turn that capital over. So in the meantime, if they can sell some, it gives them more capital to buy. For Truman Homes, for example, I'm sure many of you know they're like the largest high-rise builder in Alberta. He builds himself one MLI project per month. And he's building big ones, 100, 200, 300 doors. So that guy's acquiring an entire apartment building every single month of every year for the last few years, right? Why does he keep selling condos? Because the condos give him the capital to keep building more MLIs for himself. If the economics could work out that he could just use, he could do it all just using refinancing of those deals, but he wouldn't be able to build 12 a month. He'd be building maybe 2 per year or 12 per year. He'd be building 2 per year. So selling gives him, more money. Multifamily lots around Central Alberta, Silver Lake, Black, have jumped nearly 25%. Yeah, Sylvan Lake is bad news. We just had it wasn't my deal, but my broker was telling me about Sylvan Lake used to have like a 20% vacancy rate. And when CMHC uses the vacancies, they average it over the last 5 years. So the guy ended up getting a 60% loan to value approval. It was known going into it, but you have to know these other factors. CMHC is very much a box checking company. They can't think outside the box. They can't make exceptions. So even though Sylvan Lake's vacancy rates are low now, they're using that average vacancy rate over the last 5 years, which means that it will absolutely crush you if you try to get a CMHC approval there. These other Red Deer, as I mentioned, extremely low affordable benchmark, meaning that it kills your portfolio. Black Falls, I actually don't know that and where that is, and I used to live in Calgary, so that's a new one for me, but I'd assume it's probably a very similar situation. Dimitra, you're welcome. You mentioned something about Anchor says where investors lose the money if the deal does not go through. Can you not explain? Oh, I was going to say that most of these small deals are written essentially, with a cooling period and then firm, because we are pre-underwriting every single deal and we're adding such a safety margin that there's extremely little risk. But what I'm saying is that there are other brokerages and other realtors out there who are pumping any product that they can find without actually taking the time to see if it works. And if you buy something and do a firm deal and you put a deposit and you don't have a way to close, then you're going to be in a bad situation, right? So it's extremely important that you actually ensure what you're buying will paper properly with healthy safety margins. Will the commercial appraisal on these projects affect your net worth for the application process? No, absolutely not. As I said, you can literally double dip applications. Like you can apply to the same lender at the same time on 2 different projects and you're not even double dipping your net worth. So commercial lending is not related to your personal credit. I've only seen one time where CMHC got tight on someone and they had $700 million of CMHC loans and they got converted to a large borrower and they asked them to have a bigger net worth and they were shocked too. But I mean, most people that are buying these are nowhere near $700 million of loans. So for the average guy, it's not going to be an issue. Self-managed RRSPs, stocks as liquidity. As I said, stocks are going to be basically at full value, maybe a little discount for volatility. But if they're in an RRSP, they're going to be discounted at least 50% because of the tax implications, right? RRSPs are going to be, for net worth, they're fine. For liquidity, they are going to be heavily discounted. We really want to see strong liquidity that's easily accessible, especially as I mentioned in that slide about CMHC tightening. That was not a sales pitch. We are seeing that applications where the majority of the liquidity is coming from registered accounts are not doing very well. So we pre-qualify every buyer before we'll even before we'd even let them sign a contract to buy. And we will say, like, look, man, it's just not looking great. You're too much of your assets, too much of your liquidity is in RRSPs. We need to see more cash, more lines of credit, that kind of thing. When do the first mortgage payments kick in? Good question. That depends on the type of loan. So I didn't get into this level of detail because I didn't want to confuse people, but essentially there's 2 types of lending with CMHC. It's essentially the same thing, but different, which is an exciting way to say it, right? There is draw loans, which is where, you're potentially purchasing the land and paying the construction costs and then converting to a mortgage. And then there's direct closing loans. Most of our smaller deals are just direct closing loans, which works just like a regular pre-construction. you're going to close and start paying your mortgage right away. On draw loans, you are interest only during the construction process at a floating rate, prime plus minus 1%, depending on how good of an offering I can get you. What we do on those is we build in an interest reserve into the budget. Typically, it's around 2% of the budget because you're only drawing up the loan bigger and bigger as you get closer to completion. And essentially, you should not have any interest payments coming out of your own pocket during the construction process because we've built in a reserve into the budget for it. Once the building becomes stabilized, then it will convert to a mortgage. Assuming we didn't get rental achievement, which the majority of our deals we've been able to easily avoid rental achievement. Stabilization is basically give or take around 80% occupancy. Essentially, it's when the building can support itself, right? Like when if you turned on the mortgage with the principal and interest, would you be above breaking even? That's sort of your stabilization. On very small projects, 6plexes, 8plexes, 10plexes, where 99% of them were hitting 100% occupancy before even handing over the keys, you're essentially gonna, the day construction is done and getting your occupancy permit, if you have 100% occupancy, you're gonna convert right away and stop running up interest. On large projects, and when I say large, I'm talking about 50, 100, 200 unit buildings, it could take a year to stabilize a building because you don't want to rent 100 units all at once because that means that you're not charging enough rent, right? So on big projects, you build in a substantial interest reserve to pay that loan as you build up the rentals in the building and work your way to stabilization. How long would it take? Sorry, maybe I missed a few. There's a lot of questions, guys. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I don't miss any. Commercial appraisal, when a mortgage payments get. What area of Edmonton is the best in terms of demographic for renters? I mean, there's no single answer to that, right? The south of Edmonton and even going into the southern suburbs like Leduc is an extremely popular community, especially for the Southeast Asian community. But that doesn't mean that other areas don't perform well. Up in the north, like Cy Becker, which is kind of on the way up to Fort Mac, does also very well because you have a lot of what I call like local old Canadian white guys basically that they make high incomes because they work in the oil and gas sector or the mining sector, but they prioritize toys over equity. So they're renting because they have a jacked up pickup truck and a couple snowmobiles. So I don't think there's a single right answer to that. And again, my investment thesis is not about location, it's about value. So I will buy a project anywhere if the price makes sense, right? We were sitting in a meeting about 3 months ago now, and we were showing a building and the buyer said, I don't mean to be rude, but this area of Edmonton is kind of like Jane and Finch. And he thought he was kind of saying it in a way that he was talking shit about the project. And I said, do you know who owns the buildings at Jane and Finch? It's the Tenenbaum family, the guys that own the Maple Leafs. Those buildings cash flow like crazy. They have nearly 0% occupancy. So what's the problem with owning buildings at Jane and Finch, right? As long as you're paying the right price, you're not living there. If you have low vacancy and the money's coming in, it doesn't really matter, right? So what really matters is, are you paying a fair price for that neighborhood? And I think that's a big thing that a lot of investors have trouble with is understanding that if you're getting into real commercial, it's all just about, does it make sense for the price? It's not, do I want to live there? How long would it take from the time we sign the deal to the time we get the place turnkey to us? Every project's different, but we put the approximate timelines in the inventory list. As I said, most small projects are like 6 to 8 months. Slightly bigger ones might be 6 to 10 months, and then pretty much anything that's not like a high-rise apartment building is less than a year. How stringent is the net worth calculation from CMHC perspective? Do they or the lender ask for ongoing bank statements? Generally, it's not ongoing. They will ask for, obviously, with the application, and generally they will also ask on the funding day. So they better be substantially the same, and if they're not, you better have a good explanation, right? So I understand where that question may be coming from, and I'm not going to say it on a live feed, but obviously people do sometimes pad things, and as long as you can maintain that, you're fine. Once the approval's done, no one's going to ever look at this again until you do a refinance, right? So yeah, one second. Sorry, to clarify, not the approval. Once the funding is done, no one's ever going to look at this again. We have a live question. Can I answer?
No, it's okay.
No, go for it.
You go on.
Okay, there's only a few more. How much, also when and how money exchanges hands? It's just like a pre-construction deal. There's a small deposit with the signing, and then once you firm up, there's more deposits, and every builder has a slightly different deposit structure, but generally you're going to have all of that money in the deal within like 30 days of signing. Most of the deals, it's just going to be the full 5% after firm. There's really no reason to break it up. It's not like pre-con where you have to get the 20%. It's only 5%, and you have to have the money anyway to even start the process. So We just get the deposit done and we're done with it. I would say everywhere rents well. North, central, west are usually steady long-term rents. Exactly. As Gabriel says, vacancy rates are low everywhere. It's all about the price you pay, right? I mean, you can pay more for a condo in Yorkville than you would pay for a condo at Jane and Finch, but if you get a condo at Jane and Finch at the right price, you can make a good return, right? How also do you have the lands purchased already, or you purchased based on our criteria? We can do mandates as well. Generally, that's for larger projects, right? So if you say, Jake, I want you to find me a 200 unit building site in South Edmonton, I will go and find you that if it exists. But if you're talking about 6 plexes, 8 plexes, and 10 plexes, the demand is so high, we're just looking for any project anywhere that works. And whenever we get one, they usually sell pretty quick. And as I said, like, we don't hold inventory, right? So it's really hard to just say in this market, like, I'm going to go find you an 8-plex on this street. It's not that easy. Big sites, big development sites, we can definitely find stuff. I heard earlier today from someone else getting 95 LTV is very hard to get, still achievable. Yeah, I don't know which loan you were on, which presentation you were on, but as I say, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Just to clarify language, it's loan to cost, not loan to value, but it is absolutely achievable if the numbers make sense, right? It's the reason we see so many people not doing it is because they're buying bad projects. At the end of the day, CMHC is not going to go beyond a 1.1 debt service or 110 debt service. And if you overpaid for a project and the numbers don't cash flow, then they're not going to go to that. They're not going to reject your application. They're just going to go to the maximum cash flow they think the project can support, right? And it doesn't matter what a realtor or a broker puts in the file. It matters what CMHC believes the actual numbers for that area would be. And again, they're usually wrong and much more conservative, which is fine. That's why when we do these things, we underwrite as conservatively as possible. More importantly, as aligned with what we know CMHC wants, because we're doing so many of these files and we're working every day with the lenders and the brokers to make sure it's like our performance aren't even the real thing. They're what CMHC wants to see. So as long as we can make it what CMHC wants to see, then we can get up to that 95 a lot of the time. But as I said, we always tell people you're prepared for 90-10 or better. I have never had a file come back below 90-10. My worst file is a 91-9, okay? And most of our files are hitting 95, 96, 94, sorry, or 93 in the worst case kind of most of the time. And if anyone complains when they end up with a 7% down apartment building, they need to get a reality check, right? Can you explain the timeline when someone decides to go ahead with one of the deals? We actually have a really nice little timeline graphic because Agnes makes pretty things. I make the ugliest things in the world. But essentially, as I said, initial lot hold deposit, contract goes out, sign, 10-day cooling period. Definitely take it to a lawyer. We can recommend great lawyers that know a lot about CMHC. And then once the deal is firm, essentially meet with the broker, submit the full application. And just to clarify, you would already have met with the broker beforehand for pre-qualification. We're not going to let you firm a deal until they're confident you're good to go. And once the deal is firm, package up the file to get into CMHC, and then we will apply it to CMHC at the appropriate time depending on the delivery timeline, because CMHC allows your certificate of insurance to be valid for 6 months. So we will submit to CMHC at the exact timeline that will put us kind of in the middle of that timeline file, right? So that we don't run into a problem there. Where can we see photos of finished product? Does it include parking for all, submetering for renters, and utilities paid by others as Meta assistant finding renters? As I mentioned, we work with third-party property managers that we recommend that handle all of the lease up and ongoing management. And I already mentioned above about submetering. That is dependent on the type of product that's being sold. On a full-blown apartment building, it's always going to be submetered. On more of the small cap stuff that's going to be like townhouse product, generally it is sort of submetered. It'll be per stack. The reason being that submetering is extremely expensive, and what we do is we just divide those stacks up on the utilities on a kind of square footage split to save money, because adding $20,000 in cost to the unit just to adjust the bills a few dollars doesn't really make sense. Was there another question here? Finished product, we have lots of photos on our Google Drive of examples from the builders, virtual tours, what do you call them, Matterports, that kind of thing. So absolutely you can take a look at it. Who finds the renters? Asked and answered already. We have property managers. How is the communication between the buyer and the builders you market inventory for? Do they provide updates, photos, and construction? Absolutely. So we also generally, we don't make it mandatory, but we encourage our buyers to sit down with the builder in their 10-day cooling period to really have a heart-to-heart, because I can tell you everything about the finances, right? And our mortgage brokers and underwriters can tell you every little nitty-gritty detail about the math, but by no means am I going to tell you you know, the exact skew of the tile they're using in the bathroom and the type of window frames they're using and blah, blah, blah. So that's where definitely I want you guys to meet with the builders, because they will tell you all that stuff that I know nothing about, right? So they help provide the comfort, tell you about their building process, and then of course during construction they will provide regular updates on timelines, both for the COI application, the insurance application, and so that we can properly time when we start the lease up ahead of occupancy. Okay, Agnes sent links. How is the communication? No, I just answered that one. Does the mortgage broker charge any fees? Yes, asked and answered. Mortgage broker and lender fees are absolutely charged. They are rolled in to the costs, which that's why they show at the top of the pro forma. We charge the worst. We roll in the worst case scenario on the fees. Most of the time, it's substantially lower. That way, you're always covered. And just to be clear, if you hear from any builder that they pay the fees for you, like, don't be naive. At the end of the day, if you're buying a house, it doesn't matter if it's a CMHC house or if it's a single family house or a condo, the buyer is paying for everything, right? One way or another, the buyer is paying for everything. It's just whether they're showing you those costs or whether they're hiding those costs in a fixed price. Communication is answered, broker charge fee is answered. What are the risks with only 5% down? I'd say the biggest risk is your cash flow situation, right? Like, you're not going to get called on the loan. They're not going to ask you for a new appraisal 1 year in and say you're underwater, we want more equity. Like, there's no cash calls in this type of loan. The biggest risk would be obviously with higher leverage, that you have a more higher chance of not being cash flowing. But since CMHC's minimum requirement, regardless of the deposit, is 10% over the debt service, and since we aim for pretty much 20%, give or take, over the debt service, I don't really think there's any additional risk in the short run. Some people might say, what if property values go down and I'm underwater, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not a flipper. I'm not an assigner. I'm not a guy who's trying to get in and out of deals in 6 months. I think it does not matter what kind of property you're buying. If you are trying to flip properties, you are gambling. And if you want to gamble, you can go buy Trump meme stock. If you are holding cash flow positive assets for the long run, you don't care about fluctuations in your equity over a year or two's period. And most of my investment thesis would be around a 5-year capital cycle. And, you know, at the end of the day, you would hope in 5 years you're at least at an equal or substantially higher value. So the biggest risk is really around cash flows. What happens if CMHC asks for lease agreements RA prior to completion and can't achieve rents provided on the pro forma? I've already kind of asked and answered that. In the last 13 files we did, we only saw rental achievement come 2 times. One time we were able to appeal and get it removed. The other time we knew it would happen beforehand because the buyer wanted ridiculous terms that we did not agree with, but it's not my job to tell them no. The numbers we use are pretty darn conservative, and that's why we're not getting hit with RA. But even if we did, generally we can hit those numbers. If they did actually come in lower, they would just reduce the loan percentages by the differential, right? And it can be a very small amount. But again, these are why you have extra liquidity available and all these other things. These are why I tell buyers that they need to be ready for 90-10 and hope for 95-5, not promising every single buyer they're going to get 95-5, so that there's always extra fat there in their buying capacity to handle those worst case scenarios. But we have seen that basically never at this point, and that's why price is everything, right? If you overpay for a property, then you have to inflate the rents to make it paper. So that's why it's extremely important not to overpay for a property, because then you're easily within the range with reasonable rents that should not cause a problem. Is there any exception to regarding the 25% net worth rule? No. If anything, the exception can go the other way. If you become a large borrower, they might ask for more. But for the average me and you, absolutely not. It's going to be 25% all day, all night. If you're implying, Kevin, that you have a lot of cash but not a lot of net worth, go find a buddy with a lot of net worth. You put in the cash, he puts in the net worth, and hope that you like each other for the next 10 years. How do you guys vet the builder? Number one, we look at all of the stuff, right? I mean, we search them on Alberta New Home Warranty. We look up their past judgments or any issues that they've had. We check all their Google reviews. But then also, because of our relationships in Alberta with all of the lenders, all of the mortgage brokers, and all the other builders, we literally just go and ask our network, right? And generally, we will learn right away from other, because everyone loves talking shit, right? And if you're in the industry, so when we ask about this builder or that builder, we'll hear right away, this is a great builder, you should work with them, or be wary about these guys, right? And obviously, no one can be 100% certain. This is private industry. A builder could seem great on paper, and behind the closed doors, he could have a massive gambling problem. But at a certain point, you kind of have to do your due diligence and assume that things make sense. And most of the builders we're working with have steady deliveries of product that is well received and good quality, and that's how you ensure, right? Like one of our big builders has delivered over 1,000 homes in Edmonton and builds about 150 homes a year. I'm gonna have to go, and they have very high ratings and happy clients. So like, how can I negate that, right? Thank you very much, Jake, for sharing the info. Very helpful. Thanks. No problem, boss. You're welcome. Okay, it's 9 o'clock. So if anyone has any more questions to ask away. Otherwise, I am going home. Last chance. Cool. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Anything that got missed, you can just reach out to us on our. If you've done somehow get a contact info from this stuff, just go on our website and send an email, or just look me up or whatever. My WhatsApp is everywhere, basically, and Agnes is everywhere. Guys, have a great night.